Oscar sat at the small round table in the corner of the cafe, a steaming cup of chamomile tea untouched before him. His hand rested on the table, fingers absent-mindedly tracing the chipped edge of his mug. It used to be Tyler's favorite drink. Watching him sip it always made Oscar smile. It was calming, just like Tyler himself. He could almost hear Tyler's laugh, soft and bouncing off the walls of his memory. Their love hadn't been loud or showy. It was the quiet, enduring kind. They were each other's home. That's what it had felt like, safe, warm, unshakable. Until the day everything shook apart. The accident left a gaping hole in Oscar's life, as if the foundation of who he was had been cut away. Tyler was gone, just like that. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and suffocating grief. The funeral, the condolences, the never-ending, if there's anything I can do, it all felt meaningless. Nothing anyone could do would ever bring Tyler back. The familiar glow in Oscar's heart dimmed into a cold, empty husk, and no matter how many nights he cried into his pillow, Tyler's absence stayed as sharp as ever. This was when the depression set in. While everyone else went back to their normal lives, Oscar descended into an abyss he wasn't sure he could ever crawl out of. He stopped going out. Meals became a fleeting thought. His once comforting apartment now felt unbearably quiet. By day, he lay in bed, staring out the window, replaying memories of Tyler. By night, those same memories haunted him, making it impossible to sleep. He avoided friends. They didn't know how to talk to him now, and he didn't have the strength to explain himself. One evening, after several weeks of isolation, a knock came at Oscar's door. He had no intention of answering it. But the knock persisted, each tap like a reminder of the outside world that was still spinning without him. When he finally pulled the door open, there stood Andrew, Tyler's older brother. Andrew was almost like a shadow of Tyler, taller, broader, but with the same piercing hazel eyes and kind smile. Yet it wasn't quite the same. Where Tyler had been soft and gentle, Andrew carried a weight. There was something guarded about him, weathered, like someone who had spent too many nights battling his own demons. His face, though warm, was etched with grief. "Hey," Andrew said, simply holding up a paper bag. "You look like you could use something to eat." Oscar mumbled a token thanks and let him in, too tired to protest. Andrew didn't demand conversation or force cheer onto Oscar. Instead, he sat quietly, unpacking some soup and bread he'd brought. They ate in silence, the meal accompanied only by the occasional sound of spoons scraping bowls. Afterward, Andrew washed the dishes, gave Oscar a small pat on the back, and left. That visit became a weekly thing. Sometimes Andrew would bring takeout, other times groceries. He'd check in without prying. Some days, Oscar could barely muster a word. On others, Andrew coaxed him into watching a documentary or joining him for a short walk. Slowly over time, Oscar began to feel like he wasn't entirely alone. But Andrew wasn't some perfect savior. He carried his own grief, a fact Oscar wasn't always equipped to notice. Tyler was his little brother, the kid Andrew had looked out for his whole life, and his loss had left Andrew grappling with regrets and what-ifs. Sitting at Oscar's apartment was as much a balm for him as it was for Oscar. When they talked, the conversations weren't just about grief. They were also about how unbelievably hard it was to keep living while carrying it. Andrew approached things differently from how Tyler might have. He wasn't as cautious. Where Tyler had always taken the gentlest route, Andrew had a bluntness that sometimes caught Oscar off guard. One day, after weeks of tiptoeing around the subject, Andrew looked Oscar in the eye and said, "You can't let this wreck you forever. Tyler wouldn't want that." It wasn't an easy conversation, and it wasn't like Andrew had all the answers. He admitted to Oscar that he was still figuring things out himself, how to keep moving forward when everything felt frozen in place. But something about Andrew's honesty started to chip away at Oscar's emotional walls. Together, they began to navigate something neither of them fully understood: healing. Their journey was messy. Sometimes Oscar buckled under the weight of his own sadness and snapped at Andrew for being too intrusive. Sometimes Andrew withdrew, needing space to process his own grief. But what made their bond grow was the intentionality behind their actions. They didn't avoid the pain. They acknowledged it, even when it was ugly. For every moment that ended in tears or frustration, there were others filled with tentative smiles. It was during one of their walks, near a park where Oscar and Tyler had once spent hours stargazing, that Oscar tentatively reached out to take Andrew's hand. It was an unspoken gesture, a way of saying thank you. Andrew didn't pull away. Their relationship wasn't about replacing Tyler. In fact, the memory of Tyler became a cornerstone of their bond. They shared stories about him, laughed at his quirks, and cried when the loss felt raw again. But Andrew wasn't Tyler, and Oscar wasn't expecting him to be. What grew between them was something new, fragile yet steady, rooted in understanding. Andrew turned out to have more layers than Oscar had initially thought. He was witty in a dry, understated way, and he had a knack for finding humor to lighten heavy moments. He was also fiercely protective, sometimes to a fault, but it came from a place of deep love. Slowly, he encouraged Oscar to step back into the world. They started with small things, grabbing coffee at the cafe around the corner, joining a grief support group, volunteering at a local food bank. Each step, though small, added another thread to the fabric of their healing. Months later, as Oscar sat on the couch with Andrew, their hands clasped tightly between them, he realized something. The hollow ache in his chest was still there. Tyler's loss would never truly fade, but it no longer swallowed him whole. It had softened, dulled by time, and the kindness of someone who understood.
We're still here.
Oscar nodded, the first genuine smile in what felt like forever spreading across his face. Yeah, we are. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.